I could not believe what my own eyes were showing me when I walked through that door. There were flowers on every surface, white and cream arrangements on tall stands lining the walls, a casket sitting at the front of the room, and every single person I had ever loved in my entire life was seated in those chairs weeping, dabbing their eyes, holding each other's hands, grieving deeply and completely for me while I was standing right there in the doorway, breathing, blinking, wearing my traveling clothes and carrying my overnight bag, very much alive and very much furious. And the woman standing at the front of that room, the one in the perfectly fitted black dress with the small pearl earrings and the carefully composed expression of dignified sorrow, the one accepting embraces from my oldest friends and pressing a folded tissue to the corner of her dry eye, the one who had positioned herself at the center of my life as though she had already inherited it, that woman was my daughter-in-law. The woman my son had brought to my kitchen table 8 years ago and introduced as the love of his life. The woman I had welcomed into my home and my family and my heart with everything I had. The woman who had arranged my funeral while I was alive and sitting in the mountains of North Carolina eating oatmeal and sleeping better than I had in years. Let me tell you something right now before I go any further into this story. I have lived 75 years on this earth. I have seen things and survived things that would reduce most people to rubble. I raised 3 children mostly on my own after my husband passed. I worked 40 years at the same hospital in Dayton, Ohio. I have buried people I loved. I have sat with strangers in their final hours and held their hands and told them it was all right to go. I have walked through grief and financial fear and physical pain and the particular loneliness that comes from being a widow in a house built for 2. I have come through every single one of those things still standing, still walking every morning, still planting things in my yard, still here. But in 75 years of living, nothing could have prepared me for what I walked into on that cold Wednesday evening in February. My name is Cordelia Joann Hutchins. I am 75 years old and I live in a 2-story brick house on Sycamore Ridge Road in Dayton, Ohio. My husband Delmont and I bought that house together in 1979, and we paid it off completely in 1997, and I have lived in it ever since. I raised my 3 children in that house. I painted every room with my own hands, twice in some cases, because I changed my mind about the colors the first time and Delmont laughed at me for a week about it. I planted hydrangeas along the front walkway because Delmont always believed that flowers at the front door told people they were welcome before anyone even opened it. After he passed in 2008, I kept those hydrangeas going because I was not willing to let the things he loved die just because he did. 16 years I have kept those flowers going and I intend to keep them going for 16 more. I worked as a registered nurse on the cardiac floor at Miami Valley Hospital in Dayton for exactly 40 years. I started in 1975 when I was 25 years old and fresh from nursing school and so full of energy and purpose that I thought I could do anything. I worked nights for the first 10 years. I worked weekends and holidays and every other Thursday when the schedule demanded it. I missed my daughter Renly's first dance recital because someone on my floor was coding and I had taken an oath, and that oath was not a suggestion to me, it was a commitment I had made to people who were depending on me. I missed birthday parties and school plays and at least 4 Thanksgiving dinners because the hospital does not close for Thanksgiving and neither did I. I retired in 2015 when I was 65 years old and I stood in the parking lot of Miami Valley Hospital on my last day and I cried. Not because I was sad to be done, but because 40 years of your life spent doing something meaningful will settle into you so deeply that leaving it feels like leaving a piece of yourself behind. After Delmont passed, I did what nurses do when they are hurting, which is pour every single bit of themselves into the work because the work at least makes sense when nothing else does. I took extra shifts. I joined committees. I mentored younger nurses who reminded me of myself at 25, full of fire and completely unaware of how hard everything was about to get. I let the hospital hold me together for 7 more years until I finally let myself retire and figure out who Cordelia Hutchins was outside of those hospital walls. By the time I walked out of Miami Valley for the last time, I had built something real and solid. A pension that paid consistently every month. A 401k that I had contributed to faithfully for 4 decades. The house on Sycamore Ridge Road paid off free and clear with no mortgage and no debt attached to it. 2 life insurance policies. Savings bonds going back to the 1980s. Certificates of deposit. Investment accounts that Delmont and I had opened together and that I had tended carefully through every market up and down for 30 years. I was not wealthy by any definition that word usually carries. But I was secure. I was comfortable. I had built exactly the kind of solid ground that 2 people who worked hard their entire lives deserved to stand on, and I had protected it carefully because I understood what it had cost to build it. My son Garrison is my middle child. He was always the charming one, the one who could talk you into or out of anything with that smile his father gave him. Quick with words. Smooth in a way that nobody else in our family has ever quite managed to be. He was the child who could come home 2 hours past curfew and somehow make you feel bad for waiting up. I loved that about him even when it drove me absolutely crazy. He married Desirae in 2016, and I remember standing at that wedding thinking she was a wonderful woman. Bright, intelligent eyes and an easy laugh and a warmth that seemed genuine. I thought my son had found someone who would be good for him, who would steady him in the way that charming people sometimes need to be steadied. I welcomed her completely and without reservation. The early years were genuinely fine. Holidays around my kitchen table. Sunday dinners where she would sit across from me drinking my coffee and telling me how much she loved the house and the hydrangeas and the way I had decorated the living room. She called me Miss Cordelia at the beginning, and then eventually, somewhere around year 2, she started calling me Mama Cord. I liked that. I liked the feeling that my family had grown rather than just shifted. But something began to change somewhere around year 3 or 4. It was not dramatic at first. It was the kind of small shift you notice in the corner of your eye and then immediately doubt yourself about. Little comments that landed slightly sideways. She would pick up one of my framed photographs while we were talking and hold it with a particular quality of attention that was hard to name. She started asking questions that felt more specific than casual conversation usually requires. How long had I owned the house? Was it fully paid off? Did I have a current will in place? Had I thought about updating it recently? Was my financial situation something I felt comfortable with? I told myself she was just being thorough, just the kind of person who thought ahead, just making conversation in the way that some people do about practical things. Now I understand she was conducting an inventory. My health is not perfect because I am 75 years old and perfect health at 75 is largely a fiction. I have type 2 diabetes that I manage carefully with diet and medication. I have arthritis in both knees that has slowed my pace on my morning walks, but has not stopped them. I have blood pressure that requires daily medication and regular monitoring. My doctor at every single checkup has told me that for a woman of my age, my overall health picture is genuinely good. I walk 4 miles every morning without fail. I eat carefully. I take every medication at the same time every day. I go to every appointment. I am a former cardiac nurse and I understand better than most people what it means to take care of a body, and I take care of mine. But in January of this year, my blood pressure spiked severely one evening. I called my daughter Renley, who lives 18 minutes from my house, and she took me to the emergency room. They admitted me for overnight observation, adjusted 2 of my medications, ran a full panel of tests, found nothing alarming beyond the blood pressure event itself, and sent me home the following afternoon. It was frightening for roughly 14 hours, and then it was resolved and I was fine. My doctor followed up with me twice that week and both times said my numbers looked good and that the medication adjustment was working exactly as intended. Desirae heard about the hospitalization, and something in her changed. I can see it clearly now that I know what I know, but at the time I only felt it vaguely, a subtle shift in temperature. She started calling me more, coming by with food, being attentive and warm and present in a way that felt slightly different from how she had been before, slightly more deliberate, like someone who had just been reminded of a deadline. She started expressing concern about me living alone in such a large house. She said Garrison worried about me. She said they had been talking about my situation. She said it might be time to think more seriously about certain things. I told her my situation was exactly as I wanted it to be. She smiled and agreed and changed the subject smoothly, the way she always did. Then in late January, she told me about a senior wellness retreat in Asheville, North Carolina. A friend of hers had gone and come back completely transformed. She had already looked into one specifically for me. 2 weeks, all-inclusive, focused on cardiovascular health and stress reduction, and gentle restorative activity. She had found a discounted rate. She thought it would be exactly what I needed after the scare. I was resistant. I am not a spa retreat kind of woman. I am a porch and a cup of coffee and a novel I have been meaning to read kind of woman. I do not need someone to lead me through breathing exercises to feel restored. But Garrison called and made his case in that smooth, persuasive way of his. Renlee thought it genuinely sounded restorative. Beaumont, my youngest, who lives in Indianapolis, called and said, "Mama, please just go and rest for 2 weeks. You deserve it." 3 of my children, all pointing in the same direction. Eventually I said, "All right. I will go." Desirae arranged the entire thing. She booked it and confirmed the reservations and drove me to the airport herself and helped me get checked in at the facility in Asheville. The place was real and it was genuinely beautiful. Green mountains in every direction. Clean cold air. Walking trails and good food and comfortable rooms and structured rest and mornings so quiet you could hear your own thinking. I was there for 14 days and by the end of them I felt more rested than I had in years. My blood pressure numbers came down steadily. I was sleeping 8 and 9 hours a night. I was walking the trails every morning and feeling strong and calm and genuinely grateful I had gone. What I did not know while I was up in those peaceful mountains, being entirely unaware, was what Desirae was doing back in Dayton. Everything I am about to tell you was confirmed to me afterward by multiple people who came to me with guilt written all over their faces, desperate to explain themselves and apologize. I am going to tell you all of it exactly as I learned it. Somewhere in the first week after I left for Asheville, Desirae began telling people I had died. She did it through phone calls, not social media, not right away. She was careful and deliberate, and she did it person by person. She called my sister Ruth Ann in Cincinnati and told her that I had passed away peacefully in my sleep at the wellness retreat. She told Ruth Ann that the facility had contacted Garrison as my emergency contact and that everything had happened very suddenly in the night. She said I had not suffered. She said I had seemed at peace in the days before. She said she was so terribly sorry to have to deliver this news. Ruth Ann is 78 years old with a heart condition, and she wept on that phone call for a very long time. She told Desirae she would make arrangements to come to Dayton immediately. Desirae said she would be in touch with the details. Then she called my church friends. She called Opaline, my neighbor on Sycamore Ridge Road who has lived next door to me for 17 years. She called former coworkers from the cardiac unit at Miami Valley. She called cousins I had not seen in 2 years. She called family friends who had known Delmont and me since before any of my children were born. She called every person she had a number for, and she told each one of them the same story. Gone peacefully in her sleep at the wellness retreat. Such a blessing given everything she had been through with her health. She was resting. She was comfortable. It was her time. I need you to really sit with what I am telling you right now. This woman, who had sat at my kitchen table and called me Mama Cord and eaten my food and accepted my love and my welcome into my family, picked up her phone and called every person who mattered to me in this world and told them I was dead. While I was alive. While I was walking mountain trails in North Carolina and sleeping beautifully and eating well and feeling genuinely thankful that I had taken those 2 weeks. She told them I was gone while I was busy being very much present, and she did it deliberately and with a plan already in motion. While she was making those calls, she was also inside my house. She had access to a spare key that Garrison kept for emergencies. She let herself into my home on Sycamore Ridge Road, and she moved through it with clear purpose. Opaline told me afterward that she saw Desirae's car in my driveway on 4 separate occasions that week. Opaline assumed she was there gathering sentimental items or making sure the house was secure. She brought Desirae a casserole because that is what good neighbors do when someone is grieving. Desirae accepted it and thanked her and allowed a few tears to fall, and Opaline went back to her house feeling like she had helped and having absolutely no idea what was actually happening inside mine. Desirae found my filing cabinet in the small room I use as a home office. The second drawer. I keep everything important in a navy blue accordion folder in that drawer. My will. Both life insurance policies. My 401k and investment account paperwork. My bank account information. The property deed for the house on Sycamore Ridge Road. My savings bond certificates. My pension documentation. Everything. Delmont set up that filing system in 1983 and told me that if anything ever happened to him, all I needed to do was open that blue folder and everything would be right there. He was right. He was always organized, and he made sure I would be too. He just never once imagined that the wrong person would be the one opening it. Desirae made copies of every document in that folder. My attorney confirmed this later. She accessed and photocopied paperwork that had no business being touched by anyone other than me. She contacted a funeral home, one that many families in our community have used for generations, a place familiar to people from my church and my neighborhood. She called them, explained that her mother-in-law had passed away while traveling out of state, said arrangements needed to be made for the body to be transported back to Dayton, and began planning the service. She put down a deposit. She scheduled a viewing for Wednesday evening and a full service for Thursday morning. She told Garrison I was dead. I have to stop here because this part requires more for me than the rest of it, and I am still working through it honestly. Garrison has told me his version of events. He says he believed her. He says she told him that the retreat facility had called his number as my designated emergency contact and that I had passed in the night, and that she was handling everything because he was too devastated to function. He says he was in shock. He says he was grief-stricken. He says he trusted his wife without question because that is what he had always done. I believe that my son Garrison is not a bad man at his core. I believe he is a man who spent 8 years allowing someone else to make every decision, form every opinion, manage every difficulty, and who by the time this happened had lost the muscle entirely for asking hard questions. He did not call the retreat facility himself to confirm what he had been told. He did not ask to see any documentation. He did not call Renlee. He did not ask for anything to be verified in any way. He sat inside his grief, however genuine or performed, and he let his wife move everything around him, and he asked nothing. Beaumont in Indianapolis was called by Renlee after Renlee was called by Desirae. Beaumont tried calling the retreat facility himself and was told that guest privacy policies prevented staff from confirming or discussing current guests without proper authorization. This should have been an alarm. It mostly landed as a frustration and then was filed away inside the fog of grief. Renlee, my oldest child and the one who has always been most like me in the ways that have mattered most at every important moment. Practical. Careful. Not easily moved by a story that does not quite add up even when she wants desperately to believe it. When Desirae called and told her I had passed, Renlee cried. She cried genuinely and for a while. And then she stopped crying and she started thinking. She told me later that something in the way Desirae described everything had a quality she could not put her finger on exactly, but could not dismiss. Desirae kept returning to how peaceful it had been, how comfortable I was, how it was really such a blessing when you thought about my health history. There was something in the word blessing that did not sound like grief. It sounded like relief. Renlee filed that observation somewhere in the back of her mind and kept it there. She called the wellness retreat. Not to ask about me directly because she was smarter than that. She called to book a reservation for herself, and in the course of doing so she mentioned conversationally that her mother was currently staying there and asked whether the facility accommodated family visits. The friendly staff member on the phone said yes, absolutely. Visitors were welcomed with advance notice and offered to transfer her to guest services to arrange it. Renlee thanked her and hung up the phone and sat very still for a moment. Because a facility that had supposedly been unable to confirm or deny any guest's presence for privacy reasons had just confirmed to her through simple, cheerful accommodation that guests were present and active and receiving visitors. And nobody had mentioned any incident of any kind involving any guest. Renlee drove to my house. Desirae was there. There were boxes along the hallway wall. When Renlee walked through the door, Desirae looked startled in a way she covered quickly with an expression of mutual sorrow and opened her arms. Renlee hugged her. She said nothing about the phone call to the retreat. She looked at the boxes. She asked Desirae what she was doing. Desirae said she was just making sure that important documents were safe and accounted for, that she didn't want anything to get lost or legally complicated during the process. Renlee said that made sense, and then she left. She drove straight to the airport and purchased a ticket to Asheville, North Carolina. I was sitting at a corner table in the dining room of the retreat, halfway through a bowl of oatmeal and about 60 pages into a paperback I had been enjoying, when Renlee walked through the door. I looked up and I genuinely thought for one full second that something had gone wrong with my eyes. I said her name like a question. She crossed the room and sat down across from me and took both of my hands in hers across the table, and she said, "Mama, I need to tell you something, and I am going to need you to try to stay calm." I did not stay calm. She told me everything she had learned. Desirae had called her. Desirae had called Ruth Ann and Opaline and the church friends and the co-workers and the cousins and the family friends. Garrison believed I was gone. There were boxes in my hallway. A viewing had been scheduled at the funeral home for Wednesday evening. A service was planned for Thursday morning. My neighbor had brought a casserole. My sister had spent 7 days crying in Cincinnati. I sat in that dining room in Asheville, North Carolina, with my oatmeal going cold in front of me and my paperback face down on the table, and I felt something happen inside me that I can only describe as a door slamming shut with absolute finality. Every soft thing I had ever felt for Desirae, every effort I had made to be welcoming and warm and generous and a good mother-in-law, every moment of grace I had extended to her over 8 years, all of it closed and locked behind that door. I sat up straight and I said, "Renlee, take me home right now." We drove back to Dayton. 10 hours straight. Renlee drove the entire way without a word of complaint, and I sat in the passenger seat working through everything in my mind with the focus and the calm that 40 years in a cardiac unit had given me. I called no one. I told Renlee not to call anyone either. She asked me once what I planned to do when we got there, and I said, "I am going to walk into whatever she has set up, and I am going to look directly at her face." Renlee had gathered more information during those 10 hours, calling carefully without revealing that I was alive. The viewing was that very evening. Desirae had posted on social media the previous Sunday a long and beautifully written tribute to the woman who had been like a true mother to her, a woman of strength and grace who would be forever missed, accompanied by the photo from Garrison's wedding of me in my mother of the groom dress. Hundreds of people had commented condolences. Desirae had responded to every single one with warmth and apparent heartbreak. She had also, I learned, made an appointment with a notary and a document specialist for the Friday following the service. She had gone to my bank and inquired about the procedures for accessing a deceased account holder's assets. The bank had told her that without a certified death certificate and formal probate documentation, nothing could be processed, but she was building toward something. She was clearing the runway. We arrived back in Dayton at 20 minutes past 5 in the evening. The viewing was set to begin at 6. Renlee parked down the block from the funeral home, and we sat there in the dark car for a few minutes. At exactly 20 past 6, I opened my door and got out. My hands were not shaking. I have held the hands of people who were dying, and I have stood in rooms where the worst had already happened, and I have kept my hands steady because steadiness was what was needed, and it is what I gave. I walked to that funeral home, and I pushed through the front door, and I walked into the viewing room, and I stopped in the doorway, and I took in everything in front of me. Flowers on every surface. White and cream and pale yellow, the colors of grief and gentleness. A casket at the front of the room with a large framed photograph positioned on top of it, a photograph of me taken at Garrison's wedding, me in my dress, smiling broadly, looking happy and proud and completely unaware of where that image would one day end up. I looked at my own face smiling at me from across that room, and I felt the anger settle into me like something permanent and solid. The room was full of people I loved. Ruth Ann in the front row with a handkerchief twisted in both hands. Opaline near the middle with her husband Terrell, who had mowed my lawn twice when my knees were bad. Women from my church who had prayed with me for 30 years. Former colleagues from the cardiac unit who had stood beside me through 40 years of difficult shifts. Cousins and family friends who had known Delmont and me since our children were small. Every single one of them sitting in those chairs or standing along the walls in quiet clusters, believing completely and absolutely that I was gone. Desirae stood at the front. Black dress, perfectly chosen. Pearl earrings, small and appropriate. Her hair done with care. She was speaking quietly to a woman I recognized from my church. Accepting an embrace with her eyes lowered, her whole posture radiating the composed public grief of a woman doing something very hard with dignity. Garrison stood slightly behind her, looking hollow and pale, and like something had been drained from him. Nobody noticed me immediately. I walked fully into the room and stood near the center of it, and then Opaline looked up from her handkerchief and saw me and made a sound I will carry with me for the rest of my natural life. It was not a scream, and it was not a gasp, and it was not quite either, and it was something entirely its own, the sound of a mind encountering something it cannot immediately file anywhere. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her husband looked at her, and then followed her gaze to me. Then more people turned. And the room went silent in the way that rooms only go silent when something impossible has just walked through the door and is standing in the middle of them. Ruthin turned around in her chair and saw me and rose to her feet so fast she nearly fell. She pressed both hands over her mouth. She was already crying from grieving, and now new tears came that meant something completely different. She said my name. She said Delia. She said it like a question and like a prayer and like the most relieved thing she had ever said in her life all at once. I looked at Desirae. She had gone absolutely still. Every bit of color had left her face in an instant, and she was staring at me with eyes that were wide and fixed and trying very hard to process what they were seeing. I could see it happening behind her face, the calculation, the recalibration, the desperate search for the version of this that she could survive. She looked like a woman watching something she had built very carefully come apart all at once. I said, "Hello, Desirae." I walked to the front of the room. People moved out of my path without being asked. I heard someone near the back say, "Lord have mercy," and someone else say, "Is that really her?" And I heard Ruthin somewhere behind me saying, "That is my sister. That is my living sister. That is her." I walked all the way to the front of the room, and I stood in front of the photograph of myself sitting on top of a casket that had been purchased and placed there for me while I was alive, and I turned around, and I faced the room full of people who loved me. I said, "I am alive. I am standing here, and I am completely fine. There has been a very serious misunderstanding about my condition that I am going to address. But before anything else, I want every person in this room to know that the love you showed by coming here tonight means more to me than I have words for right now." I looked at Garrison. He looked like the floor had opened beneath him. He said "Mama" in a voice so small and broken it barely reached me. I looked at Desirae. She was pulling herself back together, not fully but enough to attempt something. I could see her looking for the right expression, the right opening sentence, the right version of events. I gave her a moment to find it. Then I said, "I think we should speak privately." She said, "Of course, Mama Cord, I don't understand how, there was clearly some kind of terrible miscommunication. I was told that," and she stopped because she could see from my face that no version of that sentence was going to take her anywhere. I asked everyone else to step into the hallway and give us a few minutes. Ruthin stayed. I did not ask her to leave. Renley came to stand beside me. Everyone else moved out, though I could see through the doorway that no one went further than they had to. Desirae tried 3 separate explanations. The first was that there had been a catastrophic miscommunication from someone at the retreat who had called Garrison's number with incorrect information, and that she had acted in complete good faith on what she was told. The second was that she had only been trying to prepare, to be organized and practical in case the information turned out to be true, that she was the kind of person who dealt with hard things by taking action. The third was simply that she was deeply and profoundly sorry, and she could see how everything looked, but she had only ever been trying to take care of the family. I let her finish all 3 versions. I stood with my hands folded, and I did not move, and I did not change my expression, and I did not say a single word until she was completely done. Then I said, "Desirae, I was not dead. You called my sister and told her I was dead. You called my church and my neighbors and my former coworkers and my family, and you told every one of them I was dead. You were inside my house with boxes. You made copies of my private financial documents. You contacted my bank about my accounts. You put a deposit on that casket. You posted on social media announcing my death. You scheduled a Friday appointment with a notary and a document specialist. You built a plan around the assumption that I was gone, and you began executing it before I was even back in Dayton. She started to cry. I said, "Those tears are not going to help you." Garrison moved to say something, and I turned to him. I said, "Garrison Delmont Hutchins, you believed your mother was dead, and you did not make a single phone call to confirm it. You did not ask for documentation. You did not call Renley. You did not ask your wife to show you anything that verified what she told you. You let this happen around you without asking one single hard question, and that is something we are going to have a very long and serious conversation about. But that conversation is not happening tonight." He had nothing to say to that, and I did not wait for him to find something. I asked Desirae to return my house key. She opened her purse and set it on the seat of the nearest folding chair without stepping close enough to hand it to me directly. I noticed that. The next morning, I called my attorney Philippa, who has managed my legal and estate affairs for 9 years. She is a quiet, measured woman whose calmness makes other people nervous, and I have always appreciated that about her. I told her everything from beginning to end. She was silent for a long moment, and then she said, "Cordelia, we are going to document every single piece of this, and we are going to be extremely thorough." We were thorough. We gathered written statements from Ruth Ann, from Opaline, from church members, from former coworkers, from every person Desirae had called. We documented her presence in my home on multiple occasions. We documented the copied financial documents. We documented the funeral home deposit and the social media posts and the bank visit and the appointment she had made with the document specialist. Philippa outlined multiple potential legal avenues, including fraud, elder financial abuse statutes, and filing false information with a financial institution. Any inheritance claim or estate scheme built on a fraudulent death would not survive contact with a real courtroom, and everyone involved understood that the moment I walked through that funeral home door. I had every lock on Sycamore Ridge Road changed the following morning. I had every account flagged so that no claims could be processed without my direct in-person appearance with photo identification. I updated my will with Philippa and changed my executor to someone I trust completely. I reviewed every document in my navy blue accordion folder. Nothing had been altered, only copied. And that was already more than enough. I called Ruth Ann that night, and we talked for 2.5 hours. She had spent 7 days believing her sister was gone. She is 78 years old with a compromised heart, and she had grieved herself hollow, and that cost her something real and physical, and I hated Desirae for that specifically more than almost anything else. I told Ruth Ann I was sorry she had been put through it. She said, "Delia, you don't apologize for what that woman did." I said, "I know." She said, "You just stay alive, that's all I need from you." I said, "Ruth Ann, I fully intend to." Beaumont drove up from Indianapolis 2 days later and sat in my kitchen for most of an afternoon. He is the quiet one of my three, the one who shows love through presence rather than words. He just sat there, solid and steady in there. After a long silence he said, "Mama, you know I would have been in the car the minute Renley called me if she had known to call." I said, "I know, baby." He said, "I love you." I said, "I know that too." We sat quietly for a while after that, and it was enough. Garrison came to see me 10 days later. He sat at my kitchen table looking like a man who had not slept properly in 2 weeks. He said he was sorry. He said sorry was nowhere near adequate, but he did not know where else to start. I told him I loved him because I do. I told him that love did not require me to pretend that what he had failed to do was anything other than what it was. He had not protected me. He had not questioned anything. He had stood beside his wife while she moved through my life as though I had already finished living it, and he had done nothing to stop it or question it or verify a single piece of it. That was a failure. It was a quieter failure than hers, but it was a failure, and I needed him to understand that clearly. He and Desirae are separated now. That is his life and his choice, and I have said nothing to influence it in either direction. I have only told him that whatever he decides about his marriage, he needs to become a man who asks hard questions when something does not add up. Because the next time someone tries to take advantage of the people he loves, he needs to be the kind of person who notices and who does something about it. Desirae has an attorney. The legal process is ongoing, and I have been advised not to go into the specifics publicly right now. What I will tell you is that I am not a woman who frightens easily. I spent 40 years in a cardiac unit learning what it means to fight for something that matters. I know how to be patient. I know how to be precise. And I know how to see something all the way through to the end. My hydrangeas on Sycamore Ridge Road are doing what they do in February, which is sit quietly beneath the ground gathering everything they need for what is coming in spring. I walk past them every single morning. I have walked every morning since 1988 when my doctor told me that consistent daily walking was the best single investment I could make in my own longevity. That is a long time of putting one foot in front of the other and choosing to keep going, and I am not finished doing it. People ask me if I am angry. Yes, I am angry in the very specific way that a woman who earned every single dollar she has through 40 years of night shifts and missed holidays and tired feet and unwavering commitment to her oath gets angry when someone looks at everything she built and decides to help themselves to it before she is finished using it. I planted those hydrangeas with my husband. I painted those rooms with my own hands. I raised my children in that house. I am not done living in it, and I am not done living, and I dare anyone to tell me otherwise. But I am also grateful in a way that goes bone deep. I am grateful for Renley, who trusted what she felt when something did not add up and got in her car and came to find me. I am grateful for Ruth Ann, who has been my sister for 75 years and cried herself empty over me and then cried again, different tears, better tears, when she found out I was on my way home. I am grateful for Beaumont, who drove from Indianapolis to sit in my kitchen and be present. I am grateful for Opaline, who has been bringing food all week now, not out of mourning, but out of celebration. I am grateful that I went to Asheville and rested and walked those mountain trails and came back to Dayton stronger than when I left, because what I walked back into required every bit of that strength. I am Cordelia Joann Hutchins. I am 75 years old. I live on Sycamore Ridge Road in Dayton, Ohio, in a house with hydrangeas out front that I have kept blooming for 16 years because the man I loved planted them, and I am not letting them go. I worked 40 years keeping other people's hearts beating on the cardiac floor of Miami Valley Hospital. I buried my husband and raised 3 children and walked every morning and tended every account and protected every single thing I built with my own effort and my own sacrifice. I walked into my own funeral. And then I turned around and I walked right back out. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your city in the comments below and tell me where in the world you are watching from right now. And if this story made you think of your grandmother, or your mother, or any woman in your life who gave everything she had and deserved so much better than what she was given, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are not subscribed yet, go ahead and do that right now, because I have more stories to tell, and I am absolutely not going anywhere anytime soon.